Hi everybody, yes, I am wearing the closest thing I get to an ugly Christmas sweater. This is my Rabbids Christmas sweatshirt that my friend got me from, I don't know, it was some Ubisoft thing, but it says Bois la 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 la, or Bois la la. I love the Rabbids, and you guys know how I feel about Christmas carols, especially parody Christmas carol. So this shirt is my freaking jam, and it's covered in Momo fur. But it's Rabbids and holidays, and so 'tis the season for Bois. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about another video that might super get me into trouble and might get demonetized. I never know what YouTube's going to demonetize, but in case of that, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Patreon helps me talk about the things that I want to talk about and that you guys want me to talk about, and I don't have to worry about YouTube's demonetization, what is or is not advertiser friendly, because I disagree with their Puritan morals. I have to live by their rules, but I disagree with them. And I'm wearing lipstick, which always makes me feel a bit weird. I sometimes try videos with lipstick and sometimes I don't, and I always kind of feel weird when I wear lipstick because if it's not perfect, I'm distracted by it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What I'm going to talk about today is the Kevin Hart Oscar controversy, and why I'm kind of ambivalent about the outcome. On the one hand, I see why he handled it really badly and why there probably was no other choice. On the other hand, I think the press is really oversimplifying this issue. And I think they're being kind of unfair. But for people who aren't aware of the controversy, I know you guys like recaps. The problem is, if I screw up anything, if I gloss over anything in the purpose of time, in the service of time, brevity, in recaps, people get mad at me. So I'm going to try to thread that needle, okay? Kevin Hart was announced as Oscar host. This is an article from the New Yorker. Now, nobody wants the job of Oscar host anymore because it's too easy to get in trouble. Case in point, what happened to Kevin Hart. The Oscar gig tends to be clunky. It tends to be profoundly unfunny. You can't do anything, and then it tends to be front-loaded. You do your big opening number. I mean, Billy Crystal was masterful of the format because he did, all the song and dance stuff, and everything was front-loaded, and then it was just when you get short on time and have to bail out of everything, it's like next word, next word, next word. He knew how to do it. Most people don't. Most of the comedians that have come up in recent years have never been trained in that kind of format. And so it's a real trial by fire. It's very hard to do. You have to be a likable comic, but also a clean comic. Kevin Hart is very likable, but he's not clean. A clean comic means you don't tell off-color jokes, you don't get politically incorrect, you don't swear. I am not a clean comic. I super respect people like Ellen DeGeneres, who were a clean comic all her life. That's not the way my brain works. I kind of stand by it. But clean comedy is I can do it, but I constantly feel like I'm... Sometimes off-color jokes are funny. Just saying. But, so he got picked as Oscar host, not the first choice. But then, as it says here, within hours, the internet unearthed a number of homophobic tweets from Hart's past, including one now deleted from 2011. Yo, if my son comes home and tries to play with my daughter's doll, I'm going to break it over his head and say in my voice, stop, that's gay. Another tweet described a Twitter user's photo as a gay billboard for AIDS. There were sprinklings of gay by association, no homo, and fat-faced throughout his feed. The journalist Benjamin Lee of The Guardian shared a routine from Hart's 2010 comedy special, Seriously Funny, in which he says, one of my biggest fears is my son growing up and being gay. That's a fear. Keep in mind, I'm not homophobic. Be happy. Do what you want to do. But me, as a heterosexual male, if I can prevent my son from being gay, I will. He goes on to describe his son Hendrix's possible homophobic tendencies, to which his fatherly response is, stop, that's gay. Apparently, he was given an ultimatum by the Academy to apologize. Um, that, as somebody with a comedy background, somebody who's apparently going back to live comedy in the new year, more on that later. There is something of a code among comedians. Do not apologize for an offensive joke if it is in fact a joke. If it was part of the routine, if there is, appropriate parental advisories on, if there are content warnings on your show, as most, you do like 11 p.m. or like post midnight, or, it's marketed as off-color offensive comedy, right? And there's a whole history of black comics and white comics, and black comedy being seen as too unseemly for white crowds, and in order to be a crossover act as like a comedian or a musician, you had to clean up and take all the sexual content that black folks were fine talking about. It was a part of life, it was honest, but white audiences just no, think of the children. So there is this very thorny history. And my background, you can't help it, with the Catskills and with vaudeville, Jewish comedy. It sort of straddled both worlds. Jewish comics were the only comics you could really work around and do both. They touch on that a little bit in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. But because Jews were sort of seen as white-ish, but not totally white, because, not Christian, they kind of existed between worlds, but never totally belonged to any. And that's part of the reason that during the 1960s and the civil rights movement, some of the most supportive whites of civil rights, black civil rights, were Jewish people in music and in entertainment, and in various places of the world. But I digress. There's a history of the white establishment, the white elites, for lack of a better term. I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about in the not so distant past, seeing black comedy as inherently dirty, and oh God, it'll corrupt your women and terrify your children. I'm not kidding. That's what was believed. And then there's the idea among all comics, don't apologize for a joke. Because if you apologize for one joke and people see it, you will never stop having to apologize. Right or wrong, that is how it's seen in comedy. And so right away, like my understanding of the internet brain and my comedy brain are at odds, because I know comics who have had their lives nearly destroyed, have had to spend a ridiculous amount of money on lawyers because of human rights complaints over some dumb joke they made. And always 10 years later, everybody looks back at their material 10 years ago and cringes. Why? Because you got freaking better and you grew up. And you realize that a lot of the things you thought were hilarious when you were 20 are not at all funny when you're 30. And the stuff you thought was funny at 30 is nowhere near as funny as you thought it was at 40. Because different stages of life find different things funny. Different things are relevant to your funny haha brain. But what Kevin Hart was trying to do, the tweets, Twitter is one of those, I've done it. I've had tweets that I thought the context was obvious. They weren't. I try to make a point of not deleting tweets because, again, once you start deleting tweets, first of all, I think it sends a bad message. If I say something stupid and people don't like it, then I should wear it. But certain things, somebody finds something 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, the context is completely gone. People do a search, and so they don't look at the tweet before it and the tweet after it. They just isolate that one tweet, and it looks really freaking bad. And what Kevin Hart was doing in these routines like it or not, find it funny or not, was goofing on the insecurity that especially men have about, I got no problem with gay people, but not my kid. And I've seen parents I know and I love dearly, especially black parents, have that concern. And this is a complex thing. I do not have enough time, and perhaps I'm not the right person to discuss this, or maybe I'm going to be doing Gavin Stevens' podcast. If you guys know Gavin, he's a Canadian comedian of color. I'm sure that's not how he described himself. He'd say I'm a black guy. But he does a podcast about race and stuff like that, and I'm going to be on it because I think Gavin's awesome. But there are, again, there's a really complicated history connected to black people and black men. And apologies to Americans who think I should be saying African American. That's what we say here. We call people black because we have African blacks and Afro-Caribbean blacks, and then people just consider themselves Caribbean or West Indian. It gets too messy. So it's just, you're black, you identify as black, awesome, you're black, I'm white, they match. Black masculinity and the performance of masculinity and the pigeonholing, the stereotypes that black men have had to live under, and the opportunities for social upward mobility, acceptable money-making roles for black men tend to have been hyper masculine, athletes, rappers, all the stereotypes, right? All the role models for black men who have made it have been hyper masculine. And then I don't want to equate race and poverty, but a lot of people who did grow up in the hoods, in sort of the rougher neighborhoods, I've seen people talk about hood masculinity instead of black masculinity. I do see, Blackish deals with this too, the show. Just to get by in the hood, you had to show no weakness. You had to be freaking tough. And that was true of the women as well as the men, but the men especially, for sure. And so, when you grow up as part of an underclass, when you are constantly having to be aware of things like performance and code switching and all that stuff, just based on your race, non-conforming gender performance is not even on your radar. This is how men are, et cetera, et cetera. Then, of course, there's the whole mass incarceration issue, which, more than anyone else affects black men and up here in Canada, Indigenous men. The homophobia connection to the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, that's another just really thorny issue. And I'm not going to get into that for obvious reasons. We don't have enough time. I hope I have shown how complex this intersection of sexuality and race is when it comes to black men and their parents, including their mothers. And, that's why shows like Empire and Moonlight and Dear White People are so important, because they tackle that head on. They all have black male gay characters, and that's really important. And I think, Moonlight, I think it was for the festival crowd, so I'm not sure that was a for us by us thing, but Dear White People certainly offered a ton of nuance. Empire was certainly a for us by us product. That was a phenomenon when it first hit. And so, that's very important, but all that has happened since Kevin Hart made those problematic statements. And that's really important because as an entertainer, you can't afford to lose your community. And, he's caught because he's a black man who has managed to cross over and appeal to white audiences, to all audiences. Like he's a really big box office draw. So he's not really in a position to sit down and have real talk about these issues, because that's not funny and that's not his job. And a lot of people don't want to hear Kevin Hart be serious. They want to hear Kevin Hart make jokes. But then there's the never apologize for a joke. And I think when you step into the rarefied air of the Oscars, that is much more white. And I mean, Oscars so white has been a thing for a while, but much more white and much more LGBTQ plus friendly than other pockets of the population, you get this clash, and you get this clash of perspectives. And I think that on the comedy thing, the comedy environment, Kevin Hart did the right thing by not apologizing, because then he'll have to keep apologizing. But if you want to host the Oscars and you've got that in your background, you do have to apologize because of the audience. It's like this new kind of crossover phenomenon. There's certain words you can't. The song that always sticks in my head is this song called "Roll With Me, Henry." And that was a black song. Roll with me, Henry. It's a much better version than the white version that was re-recorded as Dance with Me, Henry, because Roll with Me, Henry was too sexual. I'm not kidding. That's what happened with music. That's where the phenomenon of the blue-eyed soul singer came from. Elvis Presley and so on. But it's a real clash. And I think that... I think that the problem is that this is an issue of coded language and code switching, where a black person or a person who's sort of more aware, they hear Kevin Hart tell this joke about, I'm not homophobic, but my kid better not be gay. You hear that and you kind of laugh that, yeah, we're that stupid. Like this is real, and this is a barrier in thinking that we have to overcome. Trust me, I spent my teenage years doing, we didn't call it LGBTQ plus back then, but that kind of advocacy in a predominantly black neighborhood. That barrier is real, and it comes from the church, and it comes from, yes, it comes from things related to colonialism and slavery and displaced populations and all that stuff. But it's real. And so you hear that, you laugh. It's like, yeah, that's real thinking. But if you come, the same joke told by the same person, heard by a predominantly white audience who doesn't understand the code there, which is we are laughing at ourselves because we know this is stupid, but some people still think it. They hear that as just as that this New Yorker article puts it. And this is a valid perspective. I'm just saying that this is not the perspective from which I think the joke was told. Because this is a comedian, Billy Eichner. I've seen him. He does some really great stuff. But he tweeted, many of us have jokes, tweets we regret. I'm okay with tasteless jokes depending on context. What bothers me about these is you can tell it's not just a joke. There's real truth, anger, and fear behind these. I hope Kevin's thinking has evolved since 2001. Nothing that he's saying here is not true. There is real truth, anger, and fear behind these. But the joke isn't saying that the anger and fear is okay. It's, we know it's not okay, but we can't get over it. That's, that's where it comes from. And people are like, no, it's not. just trust me, okay? I've heard jokes like that, and I've seen the reaction, and I've seen similar jokes with everything from stuff about, the police to going to jail and coming out and having a criminal record, and it really is impossible for people. And I want to make it very clear, I am not speaking for Black people here. I'm just trying to show another side. And, the problem is that for the Oscar audience, Billy Eichner, it's Eichner, right? Not Eicher? Yeah, Eichner. His opinion rules the day. Those are the people that watch the Oscars and vote on the Oscars and, get catty about the dresses. The minute you have fashion, it's, white, and it's a lot less straight than most things. And I can understand why gay people would be really upset by that and not want to see a guy like Kevin Hart. And so unfortunately, Kevin Hart had a choice. Did he break the rule of comedy and apologize for the joke? Or does he do what he did and did something really dumb on, for the case of, if you want to still host the Oscars, the Instagram stuff was inadvisable. He did some stuff on Instagram that I'm not going to get into, but if you want to host the Oscars, you can't do that. If you want to continue to be a slightly ribald stand-up comedian, have at it, dude. Go for it. I get it. But there are trade-offs, and you have to decide where you want your career to go. And unfortunately, Kevin Hart, I guess, decided, consciously or not, at the last minute, that his lifelong dream was not worth breaking that rule of comedy, which is don't apologize. And I'm not saying I would have done the same thing. I think if I wanted to host the Oscars and I wanted it badly enough, I think I probably would. People say I apologize too much. I'm Canadian. I can kind of get away with it. But I see two sides. I do see how that hurts LGBTQ plus people. I am not a fan of those jokes. I really never have been. There are members of my family who to this day use, "oh, that's gay" as just a toss away phrase, and I cannot stand it. But I can't single-handedly get them to stop. I've commented on the fact that I don't like it. That's not enough for them to stop saying it. Tolerance isn't easy. And the funny thing is these are people who don't perceive themselves as being hateful to gay people. They just don't connect that phrasing to being hurtful to people who are gay. And the problem, and this is the last point I'll make, and the press for the movie Moonlight talked about this a lot, and the movie sort of deals with this as well. But when you use "that's gay" as a pejorative, because being gay is something that a lot of people kind of hide, especially when they're younger, you really don't know who you're hurting with that terminology. And that's why it's better to just, if you say that, just train yourself away from it, because you don't know who you're hurting. And the reason it hurts more is that the person who's in the closet knows you don't mean anything by it. They know you're not a bad person. They know you're their friend. And they become very afraid, hearing you say things like that you will reject them if they come out. And that's the problem with that kind of thing. You don't intend to cause pain, but you do. And I think this is an example. I don't think it's right that people should be judged by stuff they said years ago. I do think it's fair to ask questions of what they said years ago and give them a chance to respond. And like I said, Kevin Hart made the response that was right for him. Perhaps it was ill thought out. Perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps he just had to make a very difficult choice. But one way or another, I hope that this provides some nuance. And let me tell you, I'm very uncomfortable talking about issues related to race, just because I am right. I am white. I am right. I am white. Blah, bad slip. But as, my buddy Gavin Stevens says, it's important for white people to talk honestly about race. So this one's for Gavin, okay? Thanks. Who knows what's going to happen? So if you like this sort of nuanced problematic, politically incorrect discussion. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.